Now, just to sort of locate this in what I was just talking about, an example would be, for example, Esco Menico in portraits of the residents of Altbridge Park in Liverpool that were part of Liverpool Biennial 04. One could say that this is an example of an artist going in to make portraits as a number of the residents there, and to what extent they had the chance to speak back to the work, really, to what was their real participation. And I think Kwon's argument would be very much that Esco is an artist that's moving about, making work in a number of different biennials, brought into Liverpool, works with a particular group, and however good those processes of negotiation are, this becomes a work that's about representing these people fixed and stable, that these people are in this location, they're elderly, they're knitting, you know, it subscribes to every kind of prejudice you might have of this particular residence. Now, where does the wrong place come up? Kwon makes a very interesting argument, which is that if one thinks about the term being in the right place and being in the wrong place, being in the wrong place suggests perhaps being disorientated slightly, being moved out of one's comfort zone. And she suggests that one might think about the avant-garde, or contemporary artists, if you like, that they might locate art elsewhere, in other places than it belongs. And Kwon's argument is quite useful if one begins to think about what kind of artwork actually makes you rethink what a place is, or where a place is. And you might want to look more in detail in her book, but I think her point really is that the aesthetics of the wrong place is very close to a notion of situationists, derive. This notion of changing your direction, of being spontaneous, of in some ways going against something that's preordained. Now, this argument has been developed quite recently by critic Claire Bishop in talking about socially engaged practice. Now, I won't go into great detail other than to say Bishop's point really is that, in her view, the best kind of collaborative practices recently, such as Phil Collins or Jeremy Deller or someone like that, are those which in some ways make the audience, make the participants uncomfortable. And in Kwon's terms would be to engender a sort of sense of the wrong place, if you like. Now, the other theorist who you might want to look at is somebody called Grant H. Kester, who wrote a book called Conversation Pieces. And he makes a very interesting point, which is that why do artists have to be provocative? Why can't they go into places and work in solidarity with people who live there? Why can't they help to confirm a sense of place? So in some ways, I think that at the moment, theory is kind of caught between these two models. One is to say the best kind of artwork emerges by destabilizing our sense of place, whereas another argument would be that the best kind of artwork actually helps to change things through solidarity, through working together collaboratively, through creating a sense of shared common purpose. And I think that this has all been complicated by Buriot, who some of you may have read, who wrote this book, Relational Aesthetics, and another one called Post-Production. And for our argument, I think it's just useful to mention him because he's been misread. But what I find interesting is if one's thinking about responses to place or situation, what's very important to distinguish is what types of engagement are going on. And one way of bringing Buriot into the argument is to say, for me, somebody like Hirschhorn is making work which invites participation, but which is essentially, he's still the signatory of the work. Okay, so he's still interested in being the auteur of the work. It's still a Thomas Hirschhorn work. Whereas one might say that somebody like Francis Alice invites participation, he's still the signatory of the work, But his work is very much about creating some sort of intervention, and he leaves a trace. He changes the status quo. In some ways, people like Hirschhorn do that, but I think their works are, in some ways, less responses to place and more works that occur through participation. Elise, I would say, is more somebody who, where there is a physical intervention within the work. Other artists in that sort of vein are people like Minerva Cuevas, Roman Ondak, Richard Wentworth. And the third area of sort of relational work, if you like, or participatory work, is those artists that work collaboratively and fairly anonymously, in the sense that the work is often taken on by their participants. So people like Superflex, for example, who set up the Super Channel in Liverpool, which was then taken on as a project by the residents of Coronation Court and became Tenant Spin, which is a website and online broadcasting project. So this is a project that very much responded to the specifics of location of Coronation Court in Liverpool and was then taken on by the participants. And in a sense, it doesn't quite exist as a Superflex work anymore in the sense of the commercial art economy, but it's most definitely initiated by them. So I think just coming back to how do we as curators, what sort of responsibility do we have for these different kinds of engagements? I would say that the kind of unstated aim of any curatorial endeavour is that we each want to produce a situation like no other. Okay? So whether that be an exhibition within a gallery or a biennial or a set of commissions, we want it to really be unique. We want it to have a legacy. And I think that whilst the significance, we were talking this morning about how you judge success, well, the significance of any curatorial project is judged by all sorts of things, by audience figures, sustainability, consumer targets, consumer, etc., economic benefit. We could judge it by how each of those projects or artworks measures up to the stated aims to do with place. So, for example, if one looked at the Liverpool Biennial, the critical responses to it were notable in that they suggested, for example, that it was sort of tempered by a degree of parochialism. And I'll just read you this quote from an Art Monthly review. And there was a sort of repetitive riffing on certain politically or culturally charged episodes in the city's history. And effectively what I believe that review meant is that Liverpool, as a kind of obvious cipher through the Beatles or the Docs, kept emerging through all these commissions, that actually it didn't change one's notion of the place of Liverpool. It didn't initiate a sense of being slightly disorientated, that they were all rather quasi-anthropological, they were rather literal. As opposed to criticisms, reviews of Istanbul, and I'll just read you one of those, where they said that its articulation of pleasure and politics and a confident worldview and unpretentious sense of local place made it one of the most interesting projects of 2005. And there was a real sense amongst critics and amongst audience members that somehow Istanbul Biennial, which made the same claims as Liverpool to be about place, was more interesting. And so